Very good. Well, Chris, thank you for having me, and he must have a lot of faith in me because he said I had to do this without any notes, so let's hope I don't stumble too much. Before I get started, I want to share a little story and thank you all for your state and the people in it. I'll talk about my family a little bit more later, but when my daughter was really young, she spent about 6 months at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And there's no doubt the doctors and the nurses and the staff, they saved her life, and they've definitely given her a much better life, and I'm grateful to them. But there's something else that made a big difference to me and my family during that time is when there were good days and I could go out and visit, we were able to drive down to Lexington and visit the horse park. And we were able to drive around in the pastures, and it reminded me of home, and something that meant a lot to me and will always have a special place in my heart was how kind and gracious and just good the people of Kentucky were. So always know how much I appreciate that and how glad I am to be here. So this is my story about building a regenerative system, and Chris talked about this earlier too. We come up with all these names for things, and you know, a better name for it might just be how common sense has kept me in the cattle business. And I'm going to start with this quote by Aldo Leopold. It says, "Cease being intimidated by the argument that a right action is impossible because it does not yield maximum profits, or that a wrong action is to be condoned because it pays." I don't think any of us are in the cattle business to get rich. If you got into this get rich, I'd advise you choose another business. We're in this because it's a great life. We're in this because we love the land. We're in this because we love the values it instills in our children of hard work and of responsibility. And some of the things I'm going to talk about, as I've been in it a long time, is trying to figure out how to bring more young people in this, not just because of my love of the land, but because of my love of hard work, my love of the values that I cherish and I feel like we need more of. And those are instilled on farms and often on small farms. And if anyone questions at all why we need regenerative agriculture, this does sum up some of the challenges of our modern food system. In the pre-industrial era, 1 calorie of energy, it required 1 calorie of energy to produce 5 calories of food. Today, our modern food system requires 13.3 calories of energy to produce 1 calorie of food. Now, there's a lot of factors in that. There's food waste, there's transportation, but the reality is we've become totally dependent on finite resources to raise our food. We've moved away from nature, and a future like that scares me to death. So before we get into my farm, the other thing we hear lots of people talk about systems. And one thing I've found is, let's remember there's good things and there's good systems and there's bad systems. And what it comes down to is, let's remember our farms are very complex, and I believe complex systems require systems thinking. Unfortunately, we often try to apply linear thinking to complex systems, and that'll lead to systems failure. In layman's terms, my best way to explain the difference between systems thinking and linear thinking would be maybe an example of sick calves. Let's say I go to my extension specialist and my veterinarian and my animal science specialist, and I say, hey, I got calf scours, how do I treat it? And they're going to look at me and they're going to talk about antibiotics, they're going to talk about probiotics, they're going to talk about electrolytes, they're going to talk about maybe IVs, all kinds of things, and all of those will probably get the calf better. But a systems approach would be going to those exact same really smart people and saying, why are my calves getting sick? And all of a sudden then you're going to look at your entire system, and that'll relate to animal husbandry, it might relate to pasture management, it might relate to nutrition, it might relate to when the calves are being born. And simply by changing how we ask that question and look at the problem, we can come with a whole different set of answers. And those systems answers will lead me to more sustainable, long-term, and I believe profitable solutions. So I could go on about systems for a long time, but we've got more things to share. So here's a little background on my farm. It was founded in 1846 by my great-grandfather. We've got wide generations in my family. My grandfather was born in 1862 and I was born in 1969, so we don't get in a hurry on anything. We're located in the southwest corner of Iowa in what's known as the Southern Iowa Drift Plain. It's country a lot like this. Not all of Iowa is that flat, black, alluvial soil that we read about. I'm a sharecropper. I had a little bit of land and some of my own cows, but I've run cattle on shares. I've run cattle on a per head per day basis. I've done whatever I could to keep renting land and making that system work. By last year, I'd built up to about 3,300 acres of land, of which my wife and I own 320. Primarily, it's in rotationally grazed pasture. There's about 450 acres of corn, oats, barley, and hay, dedicated to feeding the cattle and stockers when we need it. A little bit out of row crop that I'm moving out of as well. And there's land in CRP, and one of the things I've found out that no one talks about, some land isn't meant to be farmed or grazed. There's about 350 acres of it that I've put into CRP or simply restricted on streams, restricted the cattle from completely or have some minimal involvement, and we've made that work through outfitting. My revenue sources, and as of last year, include sheep. I wish I would have gotten them a long time ago, believe it or not. As I get older and my body breaks down, I like them better. Cattle, outfitting. We do land mitigation for lead credits. I try to be pretty upfront. I do get USDA subsidy payments. I think that's one of the two greatest lies farmers ever tell involve saying I don't get any money from the government, so I'll just tell you I do. And my wife's great job as a special education teacher. Now, I add this, and I want to tell you up front, something that I'm starting to do. No one's following me into this business, and we'll talk about it. So I'm actually in the process of downsizing my operation to the land we own. It's very rewarding, but in some ways it's almost as hard getting out as it is getting in. So we'll discuss that too. And unfortunately, kind of tying back to that slide about the amount of energy it takes to produce a calorie of food, as we've seen our farms get bigger and some of the issues stemming probably clear back to when Earl Butz said get bigger, get out, it hasn't all been a bed of roses. I don't know where it looks like where you live, but where I live, as we're seeing a conversion of marginal lands of pasture land to crops, we're seeing extreme soil loss, we're seeing increasing amount of land owned by non-farmers. Well over 50% of Iowa's land is owned by absentee landlords. We're seeing a clearing of woodlands, farming of the highly erodible land. I call it climate change. Some people call it significant weather events. You can call it what you want, but we're getting more nasty weather. And our demographics is the one that makes me sad. We're seeing an aging population, fewer farmers, decline in enrollment. Page County, where I live, at the bottom of about 5 watersheds. We have about the highest cancer rate in the state of Iowa. And we see an increasing number of public school kids getting free and reduced lunch. So when we have people tell us that our only job is to produce and don't worry about the other things going on, something I'm really encouraged by regenerative ag is it is bringing more people in. It's doing a better job with our land. It's cleaning up our water. And I think it's creating opportunities to maybe bring younger people into this and get more people involved. Because right now, if we keep doing what the experts tell us, we're only going to get older, poorer, and sicker. I don't want that. So here's my story. Until 1998, I did my best to be a poster child for the industry. I tried all the latest equipment and bought all the new vaccines and antibiotics, and if there was a chemical to kill something, I'd use it. And I really drank that Kool-Aid. But one of the things that was really popular too is at that point, our ag economist in Iowa said, you should have your cows calving in February and March, so you have time to plant your corn in April, and you'll have bigger calves to sell in the fall, and all kinds of crap that they came up with. And I wanted to believe them. But sometimes I'd see things that would bother me. I'd see a muddy stream in the spring, or I'd see a baby calf, on a cold, rotten, muddy March morning trying to nurse a dirty, muddy udder, and it just never sat right with me. But then I'd go to a co-op meeting or a farm bureau meeting or whatever, and they'd remind me that my job was to feed the world, and I'd go back to doing the things the same way. Well, on March 11, 1998, we had a blizzard hit Iowa that was just epic, for lack of better words. We went from about 70 degrees to below zero in about 6 hours. We had about 24 inches of snow, sustained 40 mile per hour winds for 3 or 4 days, and it stayed cold. And we got through it. I got the cows in the sheds. I had my house full of calves. I mean, everything survived. But when I got done, I said, this is something I never want my cows or my helpers or me to experience again. And I know it's kind of corny, but I said, really, all I wanted out of this deal was happy cows and clean water and healthy soil. And I decided to make a change. But what drove me to that was I asked one of those really important why questions. And this why question was probably the most important question of my career. I said, why am I fighting Mother Nature? And with that simple question, I decided to change my calving season to April 1st. Now, if the ag economists and the experts were right and I went broke, I was okay with it, because at that point, I was young. I just wanted to do right by the cows and the land, and I wanted to be able to sleep at night. And if I went broke, fine. Well, that was 1998, and I'm still here, and my first step in this journey of regenerative ag was late season calving. And it was beautiful. So all of a sudden, I let the cows do their own thing and started trying to manipulate their behavior. You know, they want to. I think animals do have some rights, and I think that's the right to express their natural instincts. And when you let them express those rights, your stress reduces and you have a healthier, more productive herd. So in my case, giving birth, which I've never done, giving birth on a warm pasture on a nice April day with some green grass is a lot less stressful than giving birth in a cold, muddy lot. So all of a sudden you saw the calving issues reduce, you saw the health issues reduce. This was really good. The other side of it goes back to just good old-fashioned high school chemistry. Now, Iowa's cold. I understand it gets cold here too. But it's just how many calories does it take to impact a pound of gain? And if you're lactating in February, it takes a hell of a lot of feed and a hell of a lot of equipment to take care of that cow. So all of a sudden, my fossil fuel footprint or my carbon footprint did go down, but that actually translated into lower feed and equipment and fuel costs. And really, that kind of kick-started a beautiful relationship with nature. So from there, I learned about the importance of clean water. And I started building ponds. That's my son Spencer with me. I do believe every farmer should have a bulldozer, and that is my other real passion. But you know what? The clean water, as I started to restrict the cattle from, the clean water boosted my weaning weights. I saw about a 25 to even as high as a 50-pound gain, depending on which pasture we were rotating out of with that clean water. And as I restricted it, I was reminded of the beauty of nature. And we started to see birds and pollinators and other wild things come back, which leads us to other revenue sources on the farm. This is one of my favorites, and I'll be honest, I love red cattle, but I've never been able to make them work because I try to target the certified Angus beef market. Maybe someday I can find that sweet spot. There's nothing better for our heat, and I've experimented and I loved it, and I love this picture. But as we move forward, one of the challenges of changing your calving season in Iowa, we're fescue country also, is getting a cow bred in August in Iowa. And the solution to that was beautiful because it was involved incorporating legumes, incorporating clover. So not only did I improve my forage quality, I also greatly reduced my cost associated with synthetic nitrogen on my pastures. And on top of that, if you've got clover, you're not going to broadcast, so I went to integrated pest management and continued to manage that, which greatly reduced my cost for chemicals. I still use some Corteva products if I've got a problem. I just don't use them everywhere. And this one, we'll talk about the journey more. This is where the sheep come into the thing too, because I'm still trying to figure out how I can even eliminate more spot spraying. But it's a journey, and I enjoy it. The rotational grazing is one that we've talked about a lot today. You know, my greatest experience was when I split my first pasture in half. Right now, we're at a point, we go through about 13 to 15 pastures, moving the cows about twice a week. I'll also be honest, if I'm on vacation or going somewhere, we put them in a nice big pasture and I forget about them. So I'm not a master grazer. I hope as I get my farm a little bit smaller, I have more time to work on this. I think this is the most important thing I can work on with my operation right now. And with the farming, when I saw how well these ecological solutions work and working with nature worked, it made it easier to transition to no-till, which started to improve, soil erosion issues. It saved me money. It was good. We moved to one of the neat things, we really need multi-species crop rotations, but the question in Iowa is what do you do beyond corn and soy? Well, if you've got cattle, you make this work. And, Chris said, I've made mistakes along the way, but fortunately the cattle have eaten a lot of my mistakes and kind of spread that risk out a little bit. But right now we do a rotation of alfalfa, corn, oats, barley. I'd love to find another crop. We'll see. There's some challenges on it. And we do use cover crops, and I've worked with my neighbors a lot to put cover crops on them and graze them. It's extended my days. It's been good for them. It's tremendous forage. We're seeing some really good success on my friends that do stockers in the summer with summer annuals, and it's just cool to farm with a helicopter. And the other biggie is when I talked about not farming certain acres. We've got geospatial technology now, especially in our cropland, to say, it doesn't make sense to farm that. It can tell you how much it costs and how much it really doesn't make sense. But basically, we're identifying those acres, we're restoring the prairie, we're doing tree planting. This helps my outfitting business. But the other part of it is it's a tremendous impact on return on investment. I have literally seen farms where people have stopped farming an acre they shouldn't farm and coupled it with CRP, and the payment from the CRP and the money they save by not farming it is as high as $700 an acre difference. So it goes back to thinking about return on investment versus revenue. I don't think there's a farm in Iowa that you could not farm fewer acres on and make more money on at the same time. So none of the folks that sell us stuff talk about that. And then finally, the beauty of our cattle is they close the loop. I mean, I'm not an agronomist, but the whole secret of it is that if you take something off the land, you got to put it back on. Cow's perfect for it. High quality forage in the front, high quality nutrients out the back. Make sure you're utilizing your cows in that way too. I don't know about here, but in Iowa we've got corn stalks, we've got other opportunities. All of this helps me extend grazing season. And we're at a point now, when I started farming nearly 40 years ago, it was all about specialization. No one wanted to see a cow on a field of corn stalks. They were worried about compaction, all those things. People are a lot more receptive now. We know that with good covers, with good management, not only is this a benefit to nutrients, this is a benefit to the cattle, it's good for the land. You know, you got to do it right. You can screw it up too, but this is so important. And here's my rough results. But basically, by moving to clover, getting rid of my fertilizer, replacing it with legumes, going to integrated pest management, extending my grazing days, you know, not running equipment, and this varies from year to year because we have so much variable in cost. Right now it's saving me about $191 a head versus what I used to do. But the other one that I love, and I'll point out, and you guys probably know this, but I think the most important number you can use to measure productivity in your cow herd is percent of calves weaned per cow exposed. You've got to take it all the way through. And when I started really giving them a better life in terms of where they calved, looking at the behavior and how things were, we basically saw about $177 per head increase. And what that came to, as you break it down, in my old model, I was weaning about 85% of my calves per cow exposed. This went up to 93%. When you translate that out, it means I'm putting out 540 pounds per cow now versus 476 pounds before, because an open cow doesn't sell a calf. And I attribute a lot of that to really understanding animal behavior and allowing those cows to express their own instincts. And on the crop side, I'm not a farmer, but I have no problem telling people conservatively $80 an acre on savings. My friends that farm full-time and do this have a lot higher number than that. But again, I think sometimes we're just wired, we feel like we've got to be doing something all the time. And I'm noticing this is even as I'm making my farm smaller, I'm having some idle time and I'm not quite sure what to do with it. But I'm taking up reading, listening to books, I'm going to the gym. So I'm filling that time, but it doesn't necessarily need to be out burning diesel fuel. And the other thing that's cool to me, and I'm learning about this, it's not just economics. We've got natural capital that's doing better with this. We've got more birds, we've got more pollinators, we've got more wildlife. You know, I love looking at that deer standing in that soybean field because I can tell you which is the greater revenue generator, and it's not the soybeans. So why does this all work? And there's a couple of people, and you got some comments here, but growing up, I had Harlan Ritchie and Burke Tiekert are two really great people to listen to in the cattle business. And Burke summed it up really well. He says there's three keys to a successful farm and ranch business. They're profitable, they're sustainable, and they're socially responsible. And first of all, there's no sustainability without profit, so that's a no-brainer. But here's why it's so important to be sustainable and ecologically sound. Our farms are living systems. Living systems are sustained by natural resources, specifically soil, sunlight, rainfall, and human ingenuity. Living systems cannot be sustained by finite resources, oil and iron or equipment, because over time the cost of these resources will exceed the cost of the products we raise. I'm admittedly a tree hugger. I get that. I'll always plant trees and do these things, but there's hard economic evidence on why this really matters. And here's some of the examples. My brother's in the oil business, but if you start tracking the price of crude oil, which almost everything we do in agriculture is tied to, it follows about a 6% trajectory, and it's also certainly going way back up the line from now. The next part of it is equipment. And I used this model. I used my favorite tractor was a 1972 4020, and I was learning more about regenerative grazing. I wish I still had it. Our equipment's followed the same line. If you're trying to base this thing on buying more equipment to make it work, forget it, because we don't keep up. And for those that raise corn, I throw this in because I see corn trying to expand everywhere, and they're doing it with the taxpayers' dollars. My grandfather raised corn for 10 cents a bushel and sold it for 45 cents a bushel. That was a good business decision. Today, we're raising corn for $5 or $6 a bushel and selling it for $4.50, and the taxpayers making up the difference, and they're suffering the consequences. We need more grazing, and we need more common sense. And we look at this kind of examples. I hate to hammer on it too much, but poor ag policy is just like feeding the bears at Yellowstone. When our prices fell, our solution was to use more finite resources to raise more corn, to expect the U.S. taxpayer to sustain our farms with entitlements. 150 years of linear thinking has gotten us increased finite resource use and cost, and a disincentivized investment in soil, land, and overall environmental health. And this one, when Burke talks about being socially responsible, this is the most important one to me. So these are my kids when they're little, and that's my son Spencer now. Spencer was born with a pretty rare condition called 49XY. For some reason, he kept replicating X chromosomes, and that leads to cognitive challenges, low muscle tone. It's kind of a tough go, but he's made my life wonderful. And when that happened, being our oldest, we were told it's not heritable, but I'm a cow-calf guy. I know my way around a Punnett square, and my wife and I decided to have genetic testing just in case before we had another one, and everything came back fine. So we were ecstatic when we found out we were pregnant with my daughter Tatum. We was kissing him on the cheek. And then our OB came to us and he said, well, you're going to have twins. And they were like, wow, that's amazing. And he said, but you have what's called monoamniotic monochorionic twinning. And that's something you don't want to hear. And we lost one twin in the pregnancy, and that happens. But I'll never forget when Tatum was born, I was meeting, because she had an abdominal wall defect, which they corrected in Cincinnati. But I was meeting with the surgical team, and a nurse looks at me and says, Mr. Watkins, you've had genetic testing, your son has these challenges, we've seen all your medical files, none of this makes any sense. But we see you farm for a living. Where's your family get their water, was her question. And the reason they asked that question, this isn't about pointing fingers or placing blame, that just makes more problems, but the reason they asked that is the concern is endocrine disruption. All birth defects have causes. And they can be caused naturally, but they can also be caused by the products I use as a farmer. Atrazine's a proven endocrine disruptor. Nitrogen is suspected. Glyphosate and the inert ingredients in it are suspected. I use these products, but what I do know is that I'm learning how to use less of them, but more importantly, I know that we can farm in ways that they don't get in our water. And I guess if I've got one goal, it's that we learn how to do that so no family ever has to have a doctor look at them and say, where do you get your water from, But when I watch that and think about it, the other part of it is that this is a business. And businesses that don't listen to their customers don't stay in business. So as I put it, what the other 98.5% of the world's population wants does matter to me. And I love this chart. It's what are our top 10 priorities for ag policy and programs. And the wonderful thing about about what we do is in grazing, keeping our hills seeded, building a better environment, what we do to regenerate our soil, to learn ways to move away from some of these finite resources. They address every single one of them. But we all need good drinking water quality. We want rural job opportunities. Something I love as I'm doing this, now that we're in outfitting, we're hiring guides, we're doing other things, we're bringing more young people in. We want water quality for recreation. We want game wildlife habitat. We want to reduce greenhouse gases. Switching from simply some synthetic nitrogen to clover reduces a lot of greenhouse gases. We want tourism opportunities. And of course, number 10 is non-game wildlife habitat, and I understand that. I am in the outfitting business, and bird watchers are cheap, cheap, cheap. So how do we move forward? And this one's a little different for me. I can talk about different problems, but honestly, watching COVID and seeing some of the things that came out of it, what it was and how we treat other people, what I saw in our meatpacking plants, on people that work in them that are absolutely essential to us that were ignored or worse, on seeing people that have tremendous skills in agriculture that maybe are ignored as well. I think this is a big part of it. So I first of all, I talked about supporting nonconformists. This is my friend Reggie Hasselet-Marroquin. He's from Guatemala. He's starting to develop what he calls tree-range chickens. And what he's doing, it's small-scale farming. He's working with indigenous knowledge of providing a canopy of trees for the chickens. The chickens are protected from predators. He sells the nuts. He's bringing in farmers, other immigrant farmers, and helping them find ways to have an opportunity to farm. We have a group up in Des Moines called Global Greens that's working with refugees from Burundi and Myanmar and Bangladesh. And when I meet these farmers and I see their passion and I see their knowledge of plants and irrigation and their work ethic, I get kind of humbled. I'm very impressed by them, but I'm also really humbled, and I'm a little ashamed because I know they're doing that without farm subsidies and they're going strong, and I want to make sure that we're supporting them and making sure they have access to land and credit and the respect they deserve. So look around. The indigenous knowledge that we have, I used to not think that much about, but if we're really serious about moving forward and figuring out ways to really feed this growing world, we're going to have everyone at the table, and no one can be left out. This is a big one for me. I like Beth Dutton, but I put my farm in what's called an Agland Easement. I think that, for one, that farm's been in my family since 1848. It's served my family well for 175 years. But I also wanted a way to make sure I was paying it back and serving that land. So what this means is that my farm will always be pasture. I'm about 2 miles from a pretty successful community where I live. It'll never be subject to development. It'll never be subject to crops. And for me, since I know I may be the last generation at this means that if a young person is interested, they're going to have a chance to buy that farm someday without competition from crops, without competition from development. It's not a bargain, but at least they're going to have a fair chance at getting land. And I think access to land for young people, working with easements, some of those, it's really, really important. And if you want to know the one thing that blew my mind on this, the two groups I had to fight, I got a nice tax credit for it. I'm not a saint. But the two groups I had to fight the hardest on this was the Iowa Farm Bureau and the Iowa Cattlemen's Association. And I have not figured that one out to this day. I don't get it. Someday I hope they can explain it to me, but anything we can do to make sure young people and other farmers have access to land is critical. And then finally, this is what I'm really kind of jazzed up about, is making my farm smaller. And as I do it, I'm also learning how much I don't know about agriculture. We've got to embrace diversity in everything we do. So one thing I carry a camera with me, and I love taking pictures, but I bought the flock of sheep. I wish I would have done that 20 years ago. I'm figuring it out. I'm also learning how much I really don't know. I've got bees on the farm. The honey's a pretty good deal. That's my bird dog. She's really dumb, but she's a really good bird dog, and I love her. And we started planting trees, and we're planting a little bit of everything. Those are chestnuts there. This is for the future. I hope I'm around long enough to walk through and pick my lunch, but I also hope someone's there to really capitalize on this, and I wish I would have done all these things a long time ago. So, I'm doing them now. And then I don't want to get too far into policy, because I think if we wait on the government to do anything, we'll never get there. But I do hope they focus on building policy that rewards the regeneration of use of resources, both human and natural. That's my friend Zach Smith. He's got what he calls the Cluster Cluck 5000, and I had to put it in here. It's a circular system that he uses technology to keep the perfect 30 row spacing, and then he runs this contraption of sheep, pigs, cattle, and chickens behind it. Zach's not using any fertilizer the next year, and he's raising 300 bushel corn, and he's laughing all the way to the bank. And I do believe we've got to return to teaching animal husbandry. I think one of the downfalls of our industry was when we changed the name of animal husbandry to animal science. And as I look at that, at behavior, at bedding, I put that in there on purpose of those lambs eating the common ragweed, which is one of the products I still have to spray. And I'm pretty excited about seeing what's happening there. And finally, I'll wrap up with this. You have to be profitable, but enough is as good as a feast. So when I started this journey, my kids were really little. And a lot of people asked me about the financial side of it. And I shared with them that I'm not sure our money always reflects the things that are most important as part of our families and our land and our communities and the things we care about. So I kind of set my own financial goals. And that was to never jeopardize the land or the things it supports, the living things it supports. I wanted to send my daughter to a good college, and I wanted to provide a good life for Spencer. And Spencer's the person, when I talk about equity and I talk about compassion, Spencer's the person that's really taught me how important that is and what we do. And finally, I wanted to have enough money left over to buy a six-pack of beer on Friday nights. So anyway, I'm really proud of this. 3 years ago, I paid my farm off. I got out of debt. And I think if there's the most important thing we can do as cattle people is figure out how to get out of debt. And it's transformational. Secondly, Tatum got accepted to Grinnell College and started in the fall. And Grinnell is a really good college, and I'm really proud of her. And Spencer and I are working, a lot about making the farm smaller is about Spencer. Farms are for purpose, and they are for making a living, but we're figuring out how to diversify the farm, to figure out how he has a good life on it. Making a chicken house accessible has been my latest challenge, but he's got 5 hens and does a good job with them. We want to make our farm even more ecologically sound and want to make it more welcoming. And finally, on his 21st birthday, Spencer had a really good party, and we shared our first Friday night beer together. And all of this is possible because I decided to work with Mother Nature instead of against her. And with that, I'll just leave my reading list and see if you have any questions.
Mm-hmm. What I would think of as being kind of precision agriculture. Of the people you know and the producers you know, do you feel like that's catching on pretty well in Iowa?
They're promoting it hard. One of the challenges, it's like so many things. Oh yeah, her question was on the strips and on being like precision agriculture and how's it being adapted in Iowa. It is catching on in Iowa. One of the challenges that as farmers, we want it to lay out on a contour and kind of make it perfect. That doesn't work. You really need to look at your soil maps and start to look at the areas that aren't working and then put that back and then pick your, do you want trees? Do you want prairie? What do you want to do there? And one of the areas too that we've learned, and it's interesting, so the strips are primarily based on prairie. And the beauty of prairie, and we talked about what's beneath the soil, when you look at the roots, I always say, it reminds me of the guys in ZZ Top, their beards were like that, and that's what I think the prairie roots are kind of like. That's catching so many nutrients and keeping them out of our surface water. That's the beauty. The other part about a lot of your native grasses is they have quite a bit of lignin in the stems, so they do start to, it's a double-edged deal. They do slow down water flow, which is good, like a terrace, but they also start to mound a little bit over time, so I'm not sure there will be a long-term solution when they try to use them like a terrace. But when they can identify that land and simply take the non-productive land out, that's the big part. That's what I really see. And that's the hardest part for a lot of my friends who farm is they rent a lot of their land. So, there's not an incentive for them to do it. There probably is an incentive for a landlord to do it, but everyone's chasing acres. It is moving forward. It's just all those uncomfortable things have to be discussed as we do it. And what's beautiful is it's such a simple solution for a real big problem. So it is a good solution. It's too easy almost. Yeah. Anyone else? My easement, you'll usually wind up working through a state land trust. So like in Iowa, we have what we call the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and the Nature Conservancy, and we have the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust and Burr Oak. There's 4. And the reason for them is they're a third-party verification, and then the rest of it is through NRCS. Now, right now, with the Inflation Reduction Act money, if you're interested in it, it's a good time to look at an ag land easement, because often that is paid out on the difference of the value of your farm for the easement versus its value of development. And that can be a significant amount of money. But generally that's the rule. I would probably start with your NRCS office, and you might want to start at the state level instead of the county level. If that helps.
You said the nurse asked you about the water.
Yep.
Did you have a problem with the water? Is that what caused your son to have a problem?
We don't know. We've seen elevated atrazine levels when we go back historically, but I'm around that stuff all the time too, and that's when it came back. I'm real careful to say I don't know that it was and I don't know that it wasn't, but they looked at our family situation saying, something caused endocrine disruption, and to have both your kids have these issues that were kind of with the monoamniotic, monochorionic twinning, and the X chromosome replication, something made it do that. And the hard thing for me, as I've studied more about abdominal wall defects, I'm more worried about my daughters, and there's quite a bit of data on the relationship of atrazine in your water supply to abdominal wall defects. And I've said this, I'm not picking on Syngenta, but if we're serious about cover crops, using atrazine doesn't make a lot of sense moving forward. So and there's a pretty good professor that was hired by Syngenta that actually had a lot of his work redacted. I can't think of the right word for it. His name's Tyrone Hayes, and he's at Berkeley now. He's a biologist at Berkeley, and it's wild what it does.
I've read where there's so many parts of atrazine and all the water in out.
Yeah.
It's pretty high.
And that's where, like, what I've come back to on it is that's where I've come back saying, I know we can keep this out of our water. I don't know if we'll ever be able to farm without it. I understand the challenges, but I know we can keep it out of our water. And right now we don't enforce it. As a farmer, I've been in this a long time. Sometimes the folks that sell us these things, they just say, oh, don't worry about those people. Don't listen to them. Your job's to produce. Well, my job's to care for the land. And that's what matters to me. So sometimes they keep us in the dark a little bit. And I think it's more important that we just start to say, here's what these products do. And that's where I come back to the importance of a systems approach, saying just understand everything there is to understand about it. And then make your decisions on how you want to move forward. And sometimes you got to use that product, and sometimes you say, gosh, if I put in this third crop rotation, I don't have to use it anymore, and I just bump my return on investment. So no magic answers. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. 45 to 60. I run a spring and a fall group, but they start September 1st. If I start in August, it's too hot. We fight flies and crap like that, and I can't. But I don't want to go too late, because if those calves are born too far in October for us, they'll start to drag a little bit. I wish I could calve May 1st. That would be perfect, but that heat isn't going to happen. We can have 140-degree heat indice, and like I said, I still have predominantly black cattle. And even watching sheddability and those other traits, and I try to buy cattle that are strictly fescue adapted. I'm not going to, I feel like then I'm throwing them under the bus the other way almost, So, yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a balance. All right.
Other questions for Seth?
Yes, sir.
You said you move your cattle 3 or 4 times a week.
2 to 3, yeah.
Do you follow like Greg Judy or Dave Brown or any of those?
I've read some of Greg, both of them. I think they're both really good. And, one thing I talked to Chris about, I haven't been to a grazing school yet. So I don't like to act like I'm an expert on grazing. One of the things for me that I don't like to see my cattle fighting over water. So I get a little stressed out if it looks like it's getting sloppy around the water crop. I don't like that. If we're busy, that's where I want to be real clear. If I'm busy, I've got a couple of pastures I'll kick them into. But at the same time, that's one of my goals now that I'm slowing down. I want to keep learning, and that's where I do. And I don't know if I'm going to go to Nobles or you guys have one here. I'm really fascinated by the Savory Institute. All of those I'd like to go and learn more about. During COVID, I took an online course on silvopasture, and that was actually what made me started thinking about who was on the land before I was there. And the teacher made me go all the way back to the original inhabitants, and that was fascinating, because I did realize that there were people living in Iowa until the 1830s and 40s, and our land kept, doing better and better and more cleaner water and all those things, and we showed up with a steel plow, and it's been a different boat. So I hope we have enough between our ears to figure out how to do both, to have this great life we have and rebuild that land. But yeah, I'm interested in all of them, and when you're building an operation, you're going like your hair's on fire sometimes, and you don't always have time to take care of some of those things that might be the most important thing you could do. So now I'm just glad I'm healthy enough to do it, even though I'm too old probably. Yes, sir.
Probably the wrong question, the wrong session. We too have a lot of land that should have never been put in corn. We have a lot of land that fits corn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we lease a lot of acres.
Yep.
And I got a son here that wants to do what you're doing. And I'm looking at what I'm getting per acre, and I see a long journey. Although I know I'm not doing any favors to
Perfect question. Lowest that they'll pay, $200. $200 an acre. 200 is the lowest. That's for 52 CSR. We use CSR in Iowa, corn suitability rating. I don't think other states use it as much, but yeah, that's for margin. That would be like my farm, and here's the deal, and this is the thing that I look at. I get it, and that's the thing when you're bringing a young person in, but what scares me, like bringing them in, if your only goal, here's what keeps me up at night. If you're coming in to raise crops, because I'm watching my friends that raise crops too, and these are people I care about, these are people I grew up with. Their only way of making this work is getting bigger and bigger to the point that, what did John Deere come out with last year? An autonomous tractor. And it wasn't a little tiny tractor, it was an 8 series tractor with a chisel plow. I don't think they care about bringing young people in when they're doing things like that. I love John Deere, don't get me wrong, all my equipment's Deere. But something like that tells me they're not seeing a vision of getting more young people out here. This is where, I don't know if the whole thing I turn is going to be a disaster or not, bringing the sheep in, doing the bees, doing the other things. I'm logging it, I'm keeping track of it. I don't like marketing direct to consumers. I'm going to be real straightforward on that. I farm because I like the independence and the quietness of it, and I don't want to deal with people. And I may have to get out in my comfort zone. Like a young person might be someone more qualified to go out and start the direct marketing that I do believe works. And then the final part of it is I'm trying to figure out, and Iowa, and this is something, Iowa during COVID received $1.4 billion in farm subsidies when we started the trade, we started a trade war with China, and our solution is to take taxpayer subsidies to make up the difference for it. At some point, what I'm scared to death of is the government, they're not going to change this thing gradually. They're going to jerk the rug clear out from under it and say you're on your own. And that's not going to work either. So I think for bringing a young person in, one thing I do believe is that I'm seeing more of these landowners that are aware that this land is a precious investment, and they want someone that's going to know how to protect it. And the example I'd use, like if I've got a stockbroker that I've invested with for years, and if I told him to buy me a bar of gold, and he buys me a bar of gold, and I decide I'm going to go have my annual visit to my bar of gold, and he takes it out of its velvet wrapper and all that crap, and he just grabs an angle grinder and runs it over it and blows that off. How long am I going to keep that stockbroker? And I think this is the transition we're seeing for young people coming in. A young person that can come in like what Gabe Brown does and starts talking about soil organic matter and starts talking about covers and starts talking about protecting that investment and ties that lease to it. I think that's a real future, and that person's going to have a chance to get more acres. So I think we're still going to have corn and soy, but I think that's one of the areas on it that I believe that's where they can add value to someone looking forward, because they will be protecting that investment. And when I work with like my friend Russell Hedrick that won the corn grower champion in North Carolina, he won that using 55% fewer inputs than a lot of other farmers on that 460 bushel yield that he raised. And it must have been a perfect year. I wasn't down there. I'm guessing the rains were perfect for him. But the important thing is he figured out ways to put this whole system together that did save him money and increase the productivity. So I think that that's where a young person's going to have an angle, because I think there's going to be plenty of young kids that want to do it just the way Dad and Grandpa and everyone did it, and they're going to dump the inputs on, and they're not going to, not picking on you. But I think that I'm trying to figure out how do you position yourself to get the land, because you're going to have a lot of competition. And yeah. It takes money. And I think that is, though, I think for what, my advice would be work away from the farm for a little bit. I'm glad you want to come home. I never did. So that's one of my regrets, is I didn't get to leave. It was the 80s, and it was all hands on deck to keep the thing together. But work away from it a little bit. If you can make some money and buy some land, that's good too. I've looked at my daughter. It's not always easy, but if you're going to do it, I'll pitch a little bit of like what Rick and Liz Haney are doing with Ag Soil Regen and some of those groups. Go to one of their conferences, listen to Russell, reach out to them, talk to these guys. They're doing good work, and it is about, the most important thing we can do is make sure we have more and more young people coming into this. And at the end of the day too, I'll be honest, I'm the youngest of 7 kids, and all my siblings make more money than me. But I'm still the only one that likes getting up in the morning and going to work. So if you want to have a new pickup every year, don't go into farming. But if you want to have a good life, you know, I wouldn't trade my life for anything, but I wish I would have learned some of these things sooner. You know, and the reason we didn't, you know, you went through the 80s, obviously. I started in the 80s. When you go through that, it's real hard to trust anybody, and you just want to survive till the next day. And those scars run deep, and those wounds are deep, and I don't want to ever see that happen again. And again, figuring out some of these ways of using older equipment, of really understanding our soil and how those things work, that's the best way I know to sign your checks on the back instead of the front. Thank you. Thank you very much. I got to bug out. Thank you.